Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Saṅghāṃ Namasami. Today the 11th or the 12th? I think it's the 11th. Today is February 11th, 2021, Abhayagiri Monastery, winter retreat, new moon, Wan Prat, lunar observance. So, life of the Buddha theme, and the life of the Buddha is not easy to express or tell. Actually, incredibly difficult just to capture someone like the Buddha and try to get a snapshot or to see what was he actually like in real life. But we can imagine, use our imagination, use our thought to think of what the Buddha might have been like. And in the teachings, in the Buddha's teachings, he praised just thoughts about the Buddha, thinking about the Buddha. This is what we call the pasadiya nimitta, or the sign of inspiration. And the Buddha said, when there's just Buddha nusati, then the Buddha nusati causes the kilesa, the greed, hatred, and delusion, to not be present temporarily, and the mind is simply straight at that time while doing either Buddha nusati, Dhamma nusati, or Sangha nusati. And while we're doing those anusatis, those recollections, and thinking about the Buddha, whatever might be inspiring to us, whether it's the fact that the Buddha did those austerities before attaining Buddhahood, or just some aspect of the Buddha, like the brilliance of how the Buddha deals with different situations, or it might be the quality of the Buddha's heart, like the patience and generosity. So whatever qualities the Buddha had, we can think of these different qualities that might be inspiring for us or brightening for the mind and give rise to bright faith and hopefully unshakable faith. We were reading about Anathapindika and Anathapindika offering of Jeta's Grove and receiving initial teachings from the Buddha and attaining stream entry. And the Buddha teaches a set of dhammas that is traditionally will ripen people's minds for hearing the Four Noble Truths, and this is called the Anupubhigata, which is a set of dhammas which comes up regularly, comes up many, many times in the suttas. And this is where the Buddha, he teaches it both to lay people, but sometimes to lay people who then either take refuge after hearing about it, or they ask for the going forth. And the Anupubhigata, it starts with generosity. So the Buddha starts by talking about generosity. So taking the example of Anathapindika, he has offered this, he wants to offer meal offering to the Buddha, and then after that he gets inspired to offer this monastery. So the Buddha starts by talking about generosity. And the generosity is of these different types. So there's the different things that can be offered. There's material things, money, that could be offered on behalf of the Sangha. That's one type of generosity, or dana. And this can be like meal offerings or an offering of even work or service. And this kind of offering, depending on the intention, it can have different kinds of results. So we say ideally there's a purification of generosity in this respect, where it's done out of the kindness of one's heart. Nobody's forcing one to do it, like to do a service or coercing people to do it, but they're actually doing it out of faith and inspiration and wanting to help out, wanting to do something good. If we perform some sort of quote-unquote act of generosity, but we've been pressured to do so, or it wasn't really coming from ourselves, then that might also have a good benefit, but it won't be quite as good as, say, a purity of generosity. There might be resentment, or this idea like didn't really come from our own initiative. So when the generosity comes from our own initiative, then it has a different flavor to it. That comes from we also read about this story of King Pasenadi being inspired by Anathapindika, wanting to emulate him and give huge meal offerings to the bhikkhus. So having hundreds of bhikkhus come to the palace, but then the servants and the people working under the king would be the ones to offer the alms food to the monks. But those servants didn't have faith. The king had faith, so he ordered his servants to give these huge meal offerings, but then the servants themselves, the people themselves giving the food, weren't giving it with a heart of faith. They were just told to do so, just as workers, as paid workers, or maybe unpaid if they're working for the king. And so then the bhikkhus, who many of whom were already arhants, but probably at least stream enterers at that point in the Buddha's dispensation, they had this sense of generosity, or this sense of how food was being given to them, and what they were doing was then taking that food and then going to the donors who had faith and relinquishing the food to them, and then those donors were offering it back, but offering it with faith. And this word of this got back to King Pasenadi, and he was kind of confused by this, and so inquired about it, went to the Buddha, inquired about it, and the Buddha talked about, well, those servants they don't have a heart of faith, and they may even be doing it full of resentment, thinking, oh, the bhikkhus are just parasites living off of society, and they're not doing any work, they're not helping society in any way. And so giving the food not only with a lack of faith, but also some of them even having resentment and resenting giving the food, giving it against their own wishes. And the Buddha goes on to say that food, even whether it's delectable or simple, it's always good if it's given with a heart of faith. So a simple meal given with a heart of faith becomes a good meal. And we find that on tudong, when you get given even a little wafer or a candy bar, it becomes a really good meal. And I think in 2014, tudong and walking through Avenue of the Giants with Tanpamuto, and the previous day, we had gotten only very little food. I think we had gotten offered like a small, like a fist-sized apple pie, which we cut in half, and each of us had half of it, and then and 2 bananas. I think that was all we ate the day before, and we had also walked a very long way, and then spent the night, and it rained all night, and so the next day we were very exhausted, cold, and hungry. I think that night also, I was like, well, at least I've got this like kettle. We can boil some hot water, and I've got some tea. And so we were really hungry and cold, but then at least we were able to we thought we'd be able to make some tea at night. And so I had this little jet boil stove and screwed on the gas canister and lit it, and the gas canister ran out. And so it was empty, and so we couldn't even make a cup of tea. So then the next day we were tired, cold, and hungry, and decided to walk back toward Abhayagiri. At that point, we'd been on the road for a little over a week. We were walking back, and then we thought, well, we're going to be really hungry if we don't get food today. So we were in a little town called Red Crest, and there was, it wasn't much of a town. I think the population was 150, and there was one of these like Bigfoot shops, like where they have like carvings out front of Bigfoot and other bears and animals and stuff, and so there was this kind of shop, and there was a restaurant which was closed, and there was not really anybody around, and so then we just thought, well, if we don't get alms here, we're not going to get alms anywhere. So we just stood there, and we were standing there for a while, just with our bowls, and maybe a car or two drove by, and then the shop opened, this like souvenir shop, and their lights turned on, and they opened, and then the guy eventually came out, and he said, "Hey, do you want some coffee?" And then we said, "Well, we're monks. We don't use money, but thank you." And he's like, "No, I'm offering it. I'm offering it." So then he invited us into this souvenir shop, and it was warm. We were pretty cold still from the night before, and it was warm in there. And they started talking to us, offered us some coffee, and then they asked what we were doing. It's like, "Oh yeah, we saw you walk by last year." So the year before it was Titapo and I who'd walked through that same area. It's like, "Oh, now that we know we can offer you things, if you walk by again, we'll invite you in." And then they said, "Well, we don't have any food, unfortunately. We just have like these candy bars that we sell here." So I think they put a couple candy bars in our bowls, and we drank the coffee, chatted with them, and so we each had a candy bar in our bowl at that point. They thought, well, okay, that was nice having coffee, but we're still really hungry, and we don't want to eat this candy bar in front of them, and even though it's like really tempting. And so we went out and continued standing, and then a lady drove up, and she said, "Oh, I live in this house back there, and I saw you guys on the highway, and I really want to offer something, but I don't know if I have any food at all. I don't really have anything in the refrigerator." So then she went in her house and was searching around for food, and she said, "Okay, all I have is this pack of frozen hot dogs, and that's all I have. This is all the food I have in my entire house." And she's like, "Okay, if you wait here, I'm going to go de-thaw them for you." And so went into the house. We were waiting for a while. She came back, and there was these kind of like wet, de-thawed hot dogs. And so so we got some of those, and then but it was really amazing that it was a very pure-hearted gift. All of those gifts that morning came from a very good place. And then we chanted a blessing for her, and we chatted with her for a bit. And then we didn't really meet anybody else, so we decided to start walking. And we were just like, we stopped at a certain point. We're like, we have to eat these hot dogs. We're really, really hungry. We don't have any more energy for walking. And so we each took a hot dog and just started eating it. And Tampamuto, when he put the hot dog in his mouth, like there was some sort of physical reaction that his body had, and it just went into his stomach. And he swallowed the whole thing, swallowed it whole without chewing it. And then he turned to me and he was like, Ajahn, I just swallowed that hot dog whole. Some sort of like physical reaction because the body was just very hungry. And incidentally, this is kind of an aside, but we had been in our kind of delirious, hungry state. We had been having a conversation about owls and how they swallow their food whole. And so my response was, oh, just like an owl. But then it happened that a guy actually pulled over, and it was a German tourist, and he was totally amazed at what we were doing, and he ended up offering us tons of food then, so we had this huge meal. But I just remember the offering of those hot dogs was quite special. Like an owl, he swallowed his food whole. So that kind of generosity is quite can be quite special. There's also Abhayadana, which is the giving of forgiveness, or also the giving of fearlessness. This is the Buddha defined this as like keeping the 5 precepts as Abhayadana, offering of fearlessness to all beings by being someone who isn't going to harm them in any way, isn't going to take from other people. You just offer this sense of fearlessness to other people. If people know you aren't going to be telling lies, they know you're trustworthy, they know you have integrity, they know you don't take intoxicants, so they know that you're going to be upright and straightforward in your conduct. That's an offering of fearlessness. And then Dhammadana, the Buddha said, was the highest type of giving, the one who gives Dhamma or points toward the deathless. That's the type of giving that the Buddha would engage in. It's also a type of dana. So the first aspect of the Anupubhigata is the Dhanagata, like verses on generosity or teachings on generosity. Then there's Sila Gata, which is the virtue. So moving on from generosity, then we have the Sila. And Sila, when I kind of like the way Longpo Ban talks about it, is it's not actually, and also Prapayuto talks about it in this way, that it's not actually an external thing, but it's an internal quality. So there's the keeping of precepts, the Sikapada, which helps to develop Sila. And Sila is a composure of heart or a internal uprightness where we have this sense of almost like the internal qualities which would allow us to keep the precepts and be peaceful about it, or to feel steadfast in the precepts. So that's the Sila. There's also sense restraint is classed as Sila. That's Sangwara Sila. And that's leading to Samadhi. So the Sangwara Sila is the restraint of the eye, the ear, the nose, tongue, body, mind. And that doesn't mean closing all those things off. That doesn't mean closing those things off, but it means not giving rise to, the way it's said in the suttas is like the eye sees forms, but not giving rise to like and dislike, not getting lost in the signs and features of the forms or the sounds or whatever, the six sense bases. So not getting lost in the details of these things, not getting lost in the conventions, but there's a sense of coming back inward to oneself, gathering in. And so that's the Sangwara Sila, that's the virtue that is connected with sense restraint. So like the benefits of virtue, for myself, I'm convinced that sila is really the only thing that's going to help the world for those of us that are inclined to want to help the world in some way, or we get agitated or really concerned about the state of the world, then sila is really something that can help, and we can focus on our own sila. We can't really cause anybody else to have sila. Spoke with a group of people not too long ago, came to the monastery, and they had the idea of like, maybe they can use their computer programming skills in order to get everybody to keep sila. So like using AI to actually like convince or even trick people into keeping precepts or being virtuous. And I said, well, that sounds like a good idea, but I don't know if it's going to work. But I think it's best if we keep the sila for ourselves, and when we keep the sila ourselves, that can act as a good example. Sila also, not like non-judgmentalism, so metta, so not judging others if they might have a difference of belief or opinion in anything than us. We might get frustrated sometimes or feel frustrated if somebody sees things differently than us, and that lashing out based on that kind of frustration at other people is only going to make them more entrenched in their beliefs, more entrenched in their views. So it's coming back to ourselves, of this non-judgmental awareness and the sila, and that's really how the metta is able to develop. So if there's a sense of frustration, then that frustration, the frustration and the metta can't coexist. Or like something like, say, like anger or rage, that can't coexist with metta. It's either one or the other. We choose either one or the other. So coming back to that sense of sila, that sets a really good example. And then we take, the sila also develops pamoja. Pamoja is the contentment or delight, a sense of deep well-being. Pamoja, it's a good word. Pamoja is also the first of a different set of dhammas, the samadhi dhammas, which start with pamoja. So sila and this sense of pamoja, this sense of delight, contentment, this is what it's pointing toward. So that's the second of these gathas, the dana gatha, sila gatha, and then there's the third one is saga gatha, which is the talk on heaven. And if we equate heaven with samadhi, there's a lot of talk in the suttas of these these different jhana heavens that one is reborn into if one dies while in the different jhana states. So Sagga is the talk on heaven, and Dana and Sila being the precursors to heaven. And we can think of it as external heaven, or we can think of it as heavenly abidings, divine abidings, heavenly states of mind, where we live in our own celestial realm. And we could even think of it as like being here at Abhayagiri is very much like a heavenly realm, because we're all following precepts and we're all meditating. We're doing these very wholesome things. And we very much create a type of heaven here that we're in. If we think of, we developed perhaps some sense of wanting to develop ourselves, wanting to keep precepts. So we take on the sila, and then we get interested in higher sila, higher precepts, and so we end up coming to the monastery, and that's a recollection of heaven. It's compared to our previous situation. It's going to be more like a divine abiding, being here in the monastery. It's not the same as being elsewhere, where there's a lack of precepts, and anywhere we go where there's precepts, it is a divine abode. Whether we're here, whether we're go to Amaravati or Wat Pah Nanachat or these other monasteries anywhere, Pacific Hermitage, those are places of precepts. They become sacred ground, a sacred area. And people can sense that, people can feel that when they come here. So that's Sagga, that's heaven. Heard many people say over the years, many people make comments over the years that coming to the monastery is like coming to a heavenly realm. And the second of there's these, we'll dovetail this with these samadhi dhammas, that it goes pamoja and then piti. And piti is like the joy. There can be a sense of excitement, but it's excitement connected with sila, connected with virtue. Piti, it goes pamoja, piti, and then passaddhi, which is tranquility, serenity, relaxation. Passaddhi, and then sukha. Sukha being that even deeper well-being, that feeling like you could just abide in this state forever. You could just sit here forever and be totally happy, totally content. The fifth of the samadhi dhammas is samadhi itself. So, and that we're well familiar with that progression of sukha samadhi. So, in terms of the third of the Anupubbhikata, the Saggagata, the talk on heaven, recollection of heaven, or a recognition, I could say a recognition of heaven. And then the fourth being the drawback of sensual pleasures, and this is the kama dinawa gata. That's the drawbacks of kama. That's the K long A M A, not to be confused with kama, like the law of kama, K M M A. This is K long A M A, kama, meaning the sensual pleasure. There's sensuality, the drawback of being lost in sensuality. And this comes from seeing the suffering in sensuality. So there's that. It's kind of it's hard to see because we get lost in it, but it's so kind of bound up with craving and desire, with tanha, that when there is that sense of wanting to forget ourselves with sensuality, whatever type of sensuality it might be. It doesn't have to be coarse sensuality. It can even be a desire to listen to good music or something like that. That's the ear's sense, or for fragrance, good fragrances, and not wanting to have bad smells around us, for example. That's also connected with the senses. Or wanting only comfort and not discomfort, wanting only pleasure and not pain. So, but the drawback of that is we can't have it that way. So there's this pressure, this stress that builds up based on the sense realm, based on sensuality, and we're very much in the kamaloka, the sense or the desire realm. This is very much where we abide, where we are. And so the sensuality, the drawbacks of sensuality, the Buddha uses all these really strong analogies, it seems like it's going to give us something, but then it never does, and it's never delivered. It's in the past, it's never delivered. In the present, it's not delivering. In the future, it will never deliver. But there's this thought like, oh, maybe it will give me some sort of lasting something at some point. It's like a dog. There's like a blood-spattered bone, and a dog coming and trying to eat it, gnawing on it, thinking it'll get some benefit from it, but it gets no nourishment at all from that blood-spattered bone. It can chew on it, and it'll just reap weariness. It'll just get tired out. It won't get full. It won't get nourished by it. Or like the way the mind gets burned by sensuality over and over again, and it just doesn't stop happening. The only way to make it stop happening is with the practice to cool the mind down. And it's very powerful as well. That's why we have to give up everything and come to the monastery and give our whole life to the practice just to try to overcome this sense desire. But there's that seeing the benefit of it, the benefit of the next of the Anupubbhikata. The fifth one is the Nekama Nisangsa, the benefits of renunciation. So having seen the drawback in sensuality, then the benefit of renunciation, that cooling down of the heart from nekama, from renunciation. And this actually gives us a lot. The renunciation actually gives us a lot. We hear the word renunciation, which is our translation for nekama, but it's actually giving us something. It's not necessarily the case that we're giving up. We might, in an external sense or a worldly sense, be giving things up. Giving up all sorts of sense pleasures, giving up all sorts of things we might consider to be the finer things in life. Yet, what we gain is immense compared to what we give up. Gaining gaining the freedom, the freedom to practice, gaining the freedom to have to think about all these things and proliferate about all these things. The freedom just to be at ease, not have to be running after these things all the time. It's the story that Ajahn Ñāṇiko used to like to tell all the time of the Mataji, the Divine Mother in India, and famed for her renunciation and not having any possessions. And she was very blissful, also known as the blissful mother. So she was very blissed out all the time and always in samadhi and always really joyful and just full of bliss all the time. And then people coming to see her, and there was a time when these 3 wealthy businessmen, merchants, came to pay respects, visit her, and they did like a Q&A session, and they said, well, we're just so impressed by you. And she's like, well, what are you impressed by? And they're like, well, your renunciation is unbelievable. You literally have nothing, and like you've given up everything. And then she was very amused by this and kind of burst out laughing, and and wouldn't stop laughing. So it got kind of uncomfortable. So they're sitting there kind of fidgeting, like, what do we do? And she's almost like a crazy person. She just wouldn't stop laughing. And then she finally, tears streaming down, finally kind of gathered herself and calmed down, and she was just like, and they're kind of uncomfortable, like, oh, what's going on? And she said, you say I've given up everything. You're the ones who have given up everything. I see you as the ones who have given up everything. I have everything, and you're the ones who have given up everything. And she just thought it was completely, them thinking that she had given up everything was completely the opposite of how she was seeing it. So the benefits of renunciation, and for myself, I think about this a lot, but I don't like to talk about it too much with lay people, because we don't want to make you feel bad, or like, oh, like everybody should ordain or something like that. But that is when we contemplate the drawbacks of sensuality, it's only natural then to experience or look into the benefits of renunciation. And a lot of time I just, when I, for myself, like when I meet people, I think like, just give everything to the practice. Just give up. You don't even know what you're missing. Just go for it. Just go for the Dhamma. Don't hold back. It's not that there aren't difficulties. There are difficulties, but it's like the suffering leading to the ending of suffering. Just if whoever is able to, it's definitely won't regret it if you commit yourself to the practice and really do it in a wholehearted way. So then when the Buddha teaches this, and there's just so many places in the suttas where he teaches these things, you'll see the phrase come up over and over again. So then the Blessed One taught generosity, virtue, heaven, the drawbacks of sensuality, and the benefits of renunciation. And then when the listener's mind is pliant, bright, full of joy, listening intently and taking it all in, then the Buddha sees that, then their mind is ready for the Four Noble Truths. So then he teaches them the Four Noble Truths, the suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the reality of the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. And then that's when say for Anattapindika, that's when the Dhamma eye opens. So the way the Buddha, it's just amazing to me, the way the Buddha primes people then for the Four Noble Truths. He doesn't just like hit them with the Four Noble Truths right away or hit them with dependent origination right away. He prepares them, and that's a lot of what we're trying to do here, is preparing the mind. It's not just like, why don't you see it? Why don't you have that insight? Why don't why can't you see that? It's more like cultivating in a way that is going to really prepare us. And then step by step, just little by little, then things start to open up. In Thai, the pamoja is like the Thai translation. It points to a kind of heart opening, or like going about in an open-hearted way. Really enjoy seeing those Thai translations sometimes. It's like Jai Birkban is like the heart is like open, or it's like literally like blossoming. So it's this very beautiful mental state, this very, maybe a sense of cleanliness as well. Those are some things to think about tonight as we continue walking the path and the one pra. So maybe we'll close. We'll do the closing chant and pay respects, but then also tonight it'll be the continue practicing. Tea at midnight, morning chanting at 3.
Close with the verses of sharing and aspiration in English, page 33.